Communities on Tuesday the 14th of December. Members, we are open to the public and I welcome all to the meeting. I'll advise who's in the room and who's attending via Starleaf. In the room there's myself, Kelly Armstrong and Ciara Ferguson, and online at the moment we have Stephen Dunn and Andy Allen. We'll add on to attendance all those who join us.
With apologies from Eilish.
Apologies from Eilish for this morning. Thank you very much, Ciara. Members, just to say that today is solely to take evidence on the betting bill. No other matters will be discussed. Consideration stage of the Social Security Terminal Illness Bill will also be taking place today, so we may need to break to allow members to speak on that and then reconvene. But because there's been a minister's statement added today, I'm hoping that we'll get through this before we need to go to the chamber. Members, just to confirm for you, the young persons Zoom event on the betting bill, which was to be on Wednesday evening, has been postponed until the 19th of January. Engagement have had difficulty securing sufficient numbers of young people for the event for a number of reasons, including other school events, school exams and COVID illnesses, etc. Are members content to note? Just to say, I'd like to remind any members of the requirement to declare any interest they may have in relation to the items under discussion today. If anybody has anything, just call out, please, members. So we'll move right away to agenda item 1, which is apologies, and we have that for Eilish today, no problem.
Ashley,
sorry. It's one of those days. Draft item 2, and apologies today from our chair, Paula Bradley. Going on to the draft minutes. Members, draft minutes from the meeting on the 7th of December at page 5 of your pack. Members, are you content to agree the draft minutes? We can actually wait until later, until
yes,
we have more people
yes.
here before we'll do that, so we'll come back to that again. Members, before we commence our evidence sessions, just want to let you know that we invited the Minister for State at the Department of Justice, James Brown TD, to give evidence at today's meeting. Unfortunately, he's unavailable, but his predecessor, who has previously given evidence to the APG on gambling, will be here on Thursday. Thank you. So, moving now then to the betting bill papers. A copy of the bill is at page 10. A copy of the 1985 order is at page 42 of your pack. Excuse me. A departmental response to queries from a raised paper on the bill is at page 209. Members, have you any comments, or are we content to note that response at this stage and return to once we commence deliberations? Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. A copy of NICVA's Charter and Code of Practice is at 239. Just to say, Paul Frew has entered the room. We'd asked NICVA after their evidence session if they could provide a copy of their Code of Practice. Members, have you any comments, or are you content to note?
Content to note.
Content to note. Mark Durkin has joined us. So we'll move now to agenda item 4, which is the NICVA briefing on the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill. Your briefing paper is at page 255, and I would like to welcome Seamus McAlevey and Denise Copeland to our meeting, and I see both on screen at the moment. Thank you very much for coming along this morning, folks, and I'll hand over to you. I'll give you 10 minutes to give your update, and then we will move to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the invitation to come along today and brief the committee. Our focus is very much on the aspects of the bill that affect fundraising for charities and voluntary and community organisations in Northern Ireland. As I said, that's where our focus is, because we're focused very much on the impact that this has on voluntary and community organisations at large. We're also confident that many of our members are also conscious that many of our members are much more competent in some areas of the bill than we are. So with regard to issues around gambling and addiction, as I say, we think that is better addressed by many of our member organisations. With me is Denise Copeland, and she's our Governance and Charity Advice Manager and our specialist in this whole area. So I'm going to ask Denise to talk to the briefing paper, and then we'll be happy to take any of the committee's questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seamus. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, members. I will take you through NICVA's position on the bill. Clause 9, Rules for Societies Lotteries. NICVA did not envisage any objections to reform in society's lotteries, as is quite often seen as fundraising as opposed to gambling. Indeed, at the roundtable discussion that was held as part of the Department for Communities consultation on the regulation of gambling in January 2020, most participants agreed that they didn't associate buying a raffle ticket as gambling, but rather seen it as supporting a good cause. The current rules for society's lotteries are completely outdated and limiting the fundraising capacity of many societies, which includes charities, sports clubs and other voluntary-led organisations. NICVA warmly welcomes the provision to remove the £1 ticket price of a society lottery ticket. A society should be permitted to set its own ticket price, as it is best placed to know what price would be acceptable to charge. By way of example, to demonstrate how restrictive and cumbersome the current regulations are, if a society currently wants to run a draw with a substantial prize, for example, to win a car worth £25,000, it is obliged by current legislation to sell the raffle tickets for £1 each. It is not permitted to sell the tickets at £5 or £10. So in order to raise the maximum amount of money permitted, the society would have to sell 80,000 tickets at £1 each. Also, societies in Northern Ireland are at a disadvantage in comparison to their counterparts in GB in terms of the restrictions that are placed on them with regard to the caps on the price of a ticket, income and prizes. Provision to increase the caps on ticket sales and prizes have not been included in this bill. That is, the £80,000 cap on the total value of ticket sales in each lottery has not been revised, neither has the £25,000 cap on the maximum value of a prize. Now, we do understand that the Minister is considering amending these caps by secondary legislation as opposed to including in primary legislation, as she has the power to do so in the 1985 order. And while we appreciate that the Minister has already used her powers to permit societies to sell their society lottery tickets from the 7th of September of this year, there has been no date set for further regulations to increase the caps on ticket sales and prizes that we are aware of. Secondary legislation should be implemented to change these caps before April 2022. Otherwise, a future Minister may not see the need for this to happen. Reforms needed for other lotteries but not included in this bill. There are no provisions in the bill to update the rules for other types of lotteries, namely private lotteries and small lotteries at exempt entertainments, commonly referred to as raffles. It would be a missed opportunity not to update the rules for these either by secondary legislation or within this bill. So if I just take you through the issues that we have identified. So the issues with private lotteries. The rules on private lotteries do not permit ticket sales of more than £1,000 and tickets must be sold on the premises. As a consequence of the COVID pandemic and the resultant working from home for many, the requirement that private lottery tickets must be sold on the premises has meant that it would be difficult to run a private lottery, as the requirement is that the tickets must be sold on the actual premises. Private lotteries should be permitted to sell their tickets by electronic means to those who would normally frequent their premises, whether it be their employees, the members or visitors to their premises. The ticket sales cap of £1,000 on private lotteries should also be increased to £10,000, as this can be a useful form of fundraising by organisations who have their own premises or indeed workforces who want to fundraise within their workplace for a good cause. Issues with small lotteries at exempt entertainments, so where you see raffle tickets being sold at sporting events or jumble sales or dinner dances or dinners. So the rules for small lotteries at exempt entertainments state that tickets are only permitted to be sold on the premises on which the entertainment takes place and during the progress of the entertainment. The COVID pandemic has seen charities and other societies having to move these exempt entertainments online in order to keep people safe, while at the same time raising vital funds for their organisations. If we take the table quiz as an example, this can easily be held online, but the wording of the legislation would appear to prohibit the sale of raffle tickets at this exempt entertainment, as it is being held online and not in premises. We recommend, therefore, that the words "on the premises" is removed from section 133 subsection 2b of the 1985 order to allow the sale of raffle tickets at exempt entertainments. We would also question why raffle tickets are not permitted to be sold prior to the event, and would ask that this prohibition be removed also, as in practice many organisations do sell the raffle tickets prior to the event without knowing that they shouldn't. It is also to notify the police 7 days in advance that a small lottery is happening at an exempt entertainment. NICVA would question if this is still necessary to be included, given that many raffles that take place are unlikely to be notified to the police. So back to this bill. Clause 11, prize competitions not requiring persons to pay to participate. While free prize draws may be something which are intended to be used by commercial organisations, they are also of interest to some voluntary-led organisations. NICVA is unsure if Section 168 of the 1985 order also applies to charities and other voluntary-led organisations, as this section refers to conducting prize competitions through any newspaper or in connection with any trade or business. An example of how a charity or an independent fundraising appeal may use a free prize draw is to encourage donations or indeed entry to a sporting event, for example, and then they enter the donor's or participant's name into a free prize draw. Voluntary organisations also run pay-to-enter prize competitions as a way of fundraising for their organisations. Prize competitions depend on the exercise of skill, judgment or knowledge by the participants. This distinguishes them from lotteries, where success depends wholly on chance, so they do not fall under the remit of society's lotteries legislation. NICVA would not want to see either of these examples hampered by the introduction of new legislation, as voluntary organisations are continually having to think of different ways in which to diversify their fundraising, but the sector does need guidance from the department on this. If Section 168 of the order does not apply to voluntary-led organisations, then we would strongly recommend that the department issues guidance on prize competitions and free draws to explain what is best practice in this area, in the same way that the Gambling Commission does in GB. To date, we have been using the GB guidance as a benchmark of best practice for the voluntary community sector. The department's guidance note on the law on lotteries in Northern Ireland could easily be used to include guidance on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denise and Seamus. Thank you very much for your paper and for today. It has helped quite a lot. Thank you so much. I have a few questions and then I'll open to the floor. So members, if anyone wants to raise their hand, either through Starleaf or in the room, let me know if you want to ask questions, but I'll start off. Denise, thank you very much for that. When you were talking earlier on about Clause 9, the bill proposes that the £1 cap on ticket price for societies' lotteries will be removed. And you talked about that through your presentation, but I want to ask you, do you think there should be a maximum ticket price? We have heard of some in England as high as £100 to £200.
No, we don't agree that there should be a cap on the ticket price, because we believe that the organisation that is running the lottery or running the draw or raffle, whatever they want to call it, that they would be best placed to determine what people would be prepared to pay for the tickets. So we wouldn't want to see any cap brought in, because there's different types of raffles that will be run at different times, and I think some of the examples that have been given, if you take an organisation that's running a raffle for a massive capital extension to their premises, they will probably want to run a raffle with, or society's lottery, with a substantial maybe stake on the ticket, whether it be £20. If they feel that members could afford £50, they may do that. Every week then they might be running a lottery that's £1 a ticket, or if the £1 ticket's removed, they might decide to increase it to £2 or £5. So we think it's best that we don't put a limit on it. And also, if we have a look at this, we're now coming up to 2022, if these changes are brought in. The legislation we're working from is 1985, and that was based on older English legislation. So our legislation that we're currently working off is 60 years out of date. Could it be another 60 years before the legislation is changed again? So we need to future-proof the legislation.
Okay. You've highlighted that no date has been set for further regulations to increase the caps on ticket sales. Do you think this should be done by regulations, or does it need to be in the face of this bill?
We'd be very happy done by regulation. You know, if that's the easiest way for the department, the minister has the power to do that in secondary legislation. So we just want to make sure that it's done. And that it gets done. So, for example, if this bill was to fail, if it wasn't to progress, we would want to see that the regulations would pass before that, that it wouldn't be that it wouldn't have to wait on this bill to progress.
Just moving on then to what you talked about with the small lotteries at exempt entertainments, you're requesting that raffle tickets are permitted to be sold prior to the event, as in practice, let's face it, many organisations do sell raffle tickets prior to the event without knowing that they shouldn't. Do you think this needs to be added to the bill as part of these changes for these small lotteries?
I think it would be great if it was to be able to be added to the bill, or indeed if it could be done by regulation. But I think it's something which needs to be considered. I mean, we did raise it as an issue in the former consultation, the roundtable event that I referenced in January of last year. The department had the consultation started in the previous year, so we did raise it in our response to that there, and our members were keen that something would be done about that there.
And you've also mentioned then about having to notify the police 7 days in advance. Do you think then that should be, taken out of the bill, left in the bill? What's your thoughts on that?
We think the bill could be amended to remove it, or indeed the department may advise that it may be easier for regulation for that to happen. But we think, I mean, if consultation's done with the police to actually ask how many organisations that actually does that, how many notifications that they get on that 7 days notice, I think we might see very low numbers. So I think that if it could be done easily in this bill, or by regulation, whichever the department would determine.
Just my last one then before I'll turn to the rest of the members. Rules for societies and lotteries are number 9. So it says there that 20% of the whole proceeds of the lottery, is the limit on the expenses. I'm just thinking, we have it currently on TV in different places where you can win amazing prizes like houses and things like that. In Northern Ireland, we have had it in the past, as you have said, where people could win a car, or, if there's a significant lottery going on. Have you any thoughts on the level of expenses limits that should be placed on a lottery, or should that be removed?
Well, we agree that the 20% limit, we do believe that you do need a limit on the expenses, because we do want to see these lotteries are run for good causes, and we want to make sure that the majority of the money is given to the good cause. So we think it is sensible to put a limit on expenses.
And what about, say, for instance, if somebody the prize is a car, if they had to buy that car, then that would make you'd have to sell some tickets to cover that cost.
But if you had to buy the car, currently, if you had to buy the car, it would be extremely difficult to recoup your, for the maximum amount of money to go to the good cause. But if you remove that £80,000 ceiling, and you remove the ceilings on the total lottery, what they're actually allowed to earn, and if they're allowed to sell the ticket for £10 or £20 or £30, then they're going to get more money. They're going to get more money in. So they will have to work that out. They will have to work that out in terms of where, we'll have to raise £100,000, or we'll have to raise £200,000 in order to set a prize of that stake. And also, if there is a limit on the amount of expenses that they are able to spend, then I think that helps in terms of, I think, as a guideline for charities and other societies, in terms of helping them to not get too carried away with, okay, we'll buy a house and we'll raffle it. If we buy a house and it costs, £100,000, that needs to be 20% of the overall income of the income that we get of the lottery. So I think it will help by having a limit, a percentage limit in the legislation. Do you know, Seamus, if you have any further comments on that there?
No, I think that's important, Denise. You know, it offers good guidance. I think, as you say, and cautions against people making mistakes, lose the run of themselves, think that they can make a lot if their prize is significantly higher. So that ratio, I think, is a good thing. And the most important thing is to maximise the income for whatever the good cause is. And that's what the vast majority of organisations do. The vast majority of organisations actually don't really spend a lot in terms of expenses on their raffles or lotteries, but you do have these exceptional cases.
Thank you, both of you. I know that I've been one of those people who's gone around the countryside looking for free tickets and butchers, vouchers and things like that there to put into lotteries. Just my last question then is just, in other parts of the bill, we're considering whether there should be a ban on the use of credit cards or a cap on the use of debit cards. Would that hinder, society's lotteries if that was to be across the board for any type of lottery?
Maybe you add something on that, Kelly. I mean, one of the things that we at NICVA are looking at is the changes that are taking place in fundraising driven by all things digital, and people are starting to use their money in a completely different way. So we have to think about how we move with the times, and certainly being able to use a debit card or a credit card for electronic transactions online would be very important. And we do that, and people do that with regard to their donations to charities. So I can see the call for caps once people are in actual gambling situations, and the danger is that you could spend an inordinate amount of money, but not in the area I think that we're talking about in terms of society's lotteries. Is there anything you would add to that, Denise? Or?
No, I mean, I haven't seen any, I haven't heard of or seen any experience of anyone, selling lottery tickets and coming up against the issue of someone with a gambling problem. It tends to be the supporters and the members and people who are interested in the organisation that want to help.
I'm just thinking if there's an unintended consequence that could happen if there was a new clause, say for instance banning the use of credit cards or a cap put on debit cards, but it's, as you say, the amount that people are spending, to buy raffle tickets, unless the raffle ticket price goes up, is a tiny amount. No, that's grand. I'll go out to the members on the committee now. Everybody okay, or Mark? Yeah.
Thank you, Denise and Seamus, and thank you, Chair, for bringing me in. The points on the cap, and I agree with points that you guys have made there, and other witnesses have made them previously. In terms of the £1 cap, that's just ridiculous and completely. It's a disaster if you're running a raffle. It's a disaster even at times if you're trying to buy tickets and you have to actually fill out 10 or 20 whenever you're doing that. But I was just wondering, is there a risk of removing the cap? I understand it's there, or I imagine it's there to protect people from causing harm to themselves through gambling or others. But I wonder, by removing it altogether, might there be issues there where potentially other authorities might have a look at it, and that there's risk of money laundering and things like that? Sorry, I haven't. That's not very coherent at all, guys. It just occurred to me this morning as I was sitting here. If if tickets are £250 and some society or charity or party just starts selling these tickets, and they sold 100 tickets to Joe Bloggs.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick that up, Mark. And I mean, I don't see that happening in terms of that raffles being used, as a money laundering exercise. It could happen, and I suppose at that point it's a matter for the authorities who watch and monitor for these things to see if there's abuse. There can always be abuse in terms of companies. There can be abuse in terms of charities and things like that, and that has come up over the years. The more central point, I think, to us is, I suppose, there's that issue that economists talk about, elasticity of demand, and for the vast majority of our small societies, they will carefully set their price. As Denise says, they really understand their membership. And if you set your price too high, and too high might be a fiver, you won't sell the tickets. And if you set it lower or at the best point, greater number of tickets are sold and more money is made for the good cause. So we think organisations are pretty astute on that area. And I think where really nefarious stuff that you're alluding to might happen, Mark, then it's a matter for the public authorities, the legal authority to be on top of that.
Yeah, and I fully support the points that you guys were making, but some organisations might be more astute than others.
I think Mark's point's well made. It's one of the concerns.
It was a good point. It wasn't well made.
And there was something actually that I was thinking about just as you were asking it, Mark. One of the things that we want to do is absolutely protect those organisations who are genuinely raising money, for good causes and will progress their charitable objectives, through the work that they're doing with a lottery or any raffles. But it's where nefarious organisations or people are coming together to try to abuse the system. I think that's where we need to just be mindful that we do protect those who are doing things for the right reasons. Any other members indicating? I don't see anyone online or in the room today. Seamus and Denise, thank you so much for your presentation today. It certainly has helped us because we did need to hear more from yourselves and from charities about this bill, so that has been exceptionally useful. I don't know whether we will be speaking to you between now and Christmas, so if we don't, happy Christmas to yourselves, and please pass on our best wishes to all in NICVA. I know that you have worked extraordinarily hard over the last couple of years and it is very much appreciated, so please do pass that on to all of the staff and the volunteers who are with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for your kind regards, and it's a pleasure to talk to the committee as always, and any time in the future. And again, happy Christmas from everyone at NICVA and from the volunteering community sector at large to you and the committee.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Happy Christmas and thank you.
Bye, Denise. Members, thank you very much for that. We'll move on now to agenda item 5, which is the Advice NI briefing on the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill. Your briefing paper is at page 265 of your pack. And for now, we'll be welcoming Kevin Higgins, Emma Mullen and Charlotte Ahmed. I see Kevin here at the moment. To be honest, Kevin, as I always say, you're the font of all knowledge, so you're very welcome today. I'll give you about 10 minutes, Kevin, if that's okay. So if you want to go on ahead and start your briefing, Kevin, and then we'll bring some questions in for you afterwards.
No problem. Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you to the committee as ever for the invitation. Thank you, committee, and thank you for the invitation. Excuse me, I'm Kevin Higgins, Head of Policy with Advice NI. Hopefully Charlotte will be joining us or whatever, because she would go through the detailed views that we have got on the legislation, on the amendments. And then I was proposing to provide some wrap-up information on the case study and just some general thoughts that the committee might want to take into account. Very briefly, as you know, Advice NI is the umbrella organisation for the independent advice network, advice and support to those that need it most, usually in the area of social security, welfare reform, but also in debt and money advice, which is particularly relevant to this issue, housing and employment and consumer and so on. The purpose of ourselves at this session is to be as concise, focused, as targeted as possible, and to be realistic about where there's an opportunity to maybe change within the amendment legislation, and also where that change is likely to bring about significant beneficial impact. So we're going to try and focus our best on that. Gambling, as you may know, gambling is not a particular focus for us in terms of our expertise or our services and so on, but I think our views are in relation to the issue of the impact of problem gambling, or to put another way, to support those suffering from gambling addiction. And I suppose terminology is important, and I'll maybe say a little bit about that later on as well too, around are we sanitising things, or could we actually be a little bit edgier, which might then reach out more to people that are struggling with these things. But without further ado, hopefully Charlotte has joined us. I will invite my colleague Charlotte to introduce herself and then go through our particular comments, and then maybe if Charlotte passes back to me, I will wrap our particular presentation up. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Kevin. So basically from April 2020 to March 2021, 11 cases were opened with the Advice NI debt team with the reason for indebtedness being gambling and a total debt of just under £217,000. This illustrates how widespread gambling addiction is, and it affects not only the individual but also their family. There are 4 areas of the revised legislation that Advice NI would like to highlight and respond to, namely gaming machines, societies lotteries, industry levy and code of practice. Advice NI believes these measures to be appropriate and socially responsible. With gaming machines, Clause 7 creates a new offence in relation to the playing of gaming machines by persons under the age of 18. Advice NI agrees with the amendment and believes it's appropriate to allocate the responsibility of preventing underage gambling to those who operate gaming machines. Societies lotteries. The amendment removes the £1 ticket price limit for societies lotteries. This facilitates fundraising by charities as opposed to a promotion of gambling. Advice NI welcomes the removal of the £1 cap, which should specifically help those charities operating in Northern Ireland. The industry levy. Clause 14 inserts a new article to allow the Department to make regulations with regards to the payment of a levy to the Department by every person who intends to apply for a grant or renewal of a licence. In our response to the all-party group on reducing harm relating to gambling, Advice NI stated that we strongly suggest due consideration be given to providing additional funding to consumer advice and gambling support organisations that seek to prevent and address debt and addiction problems. So it's encouraging to see legislation that generates monies through the gambling operators and distributed to various projects. The gambling operators should take responsibility to address a very real need of those who are addicted to gambling. Certain organisations subject to the levy will have considerably higher profits than others, for example, bookmakers higher than bingo halls. The levy could be a percentage of profits on a tiered approach based on income levels. And finally, the code of practice that describes arrangements that should be made to ensure gambling is conducted in a fair way, that persons under the age of 18 and other vulnerable persons are protected from gambling harm or exploitation. And that is crucial, Advice NI believes. Advice NI welcomes the strengthening of existing regulatory protections for operators, consumers, and specifically young people and those vulnerable to gambling harm, such as age verification. While some measures already exist, a greater onus needs to be placed on the operators so that they have a legal responsibility to ensure the vulnerable are not exploited by gambling. And therefore, Advice NI is keen to see a code of practice implemented. Back to you, Kevin.
It feels a bit like the ITV news here. Back to the studio. So if I just wrap up, and thank you for that, Charlotte. We provided our case study to the committee, so I won't rehearse it word for word, but just to say that that's the type of case that our debt service in particular would come across, and there's significant amounts of money there. So I mean, as we said in our case study, a family member had already paid off 15,000 worth of the client's gambling debt, but that still remained 19,000 outstanding. It was 10,000 to other family members and friends, and then 9,000 to credit card, payday loans, overdraft, quite expensive forms of debt there that had been accrued due to gambling. What our debt advisor was able to do was, number one, was able to try and signpost to other forms of counselling and support for the person. In this particular case, the family unit seemed to have got around the person and there was adequate support there, or the person felt there was adequate support there. And then in particular, in relation to the debt problem caused by the gambling, the advisor was able to put in place or help to facilitate a debt management plan. And then that brought about almost the lifting of the weight of the financial issue then. Client felt a huge sense of relief that they were able to manage the debt, concentrate on moving forward, moving away from the gambling problem that had blighted and ruined their life, so to speak. And what Emma, our debt manager, has said here is that many clients, like the one above, have accrued significant amounts of debt as a direct result of gambling. In our experience, gambling can have a devastating impact not only on our clients' lives, but it does trickle out, so it goes to the wider family circle and the wider friend circle as well. And I suppose worryingly then that can lead to maybe people that have the problem being ostracised there, particularly if they owe money or whatever. So then you end up becoming isolated and so on, and then we get into greater problems. So that's the case study. And please, Chair, if I can, I will sort of maybe wrap up and take it back to you with just some final thoughts. Yep. Firstly, independent advice. We think that should be a crucial part of any treatment package, if you like, because if we can get the finances in order, then the person can focus on, if there's treatment or counselling and so on, and try and get that sorted as well. So I think actually those two things can and should go hand in hand. The language issue that I referred to earlier and problem gambling, or do we try and be a bit more edgy about it and call it out for what it is for those people that are really affected and suffering from gambling addiction and so on. And the issue of terminology, for example, I logged on to the National Lottery website, and of course, the terminology there is interesting. It's play the National Lottery, and our games are fun and enjoyable, and so on. So this terminology and the framing around playing and fun and so on. So I just wonder, do we need to sort of consider that and just think where we are in terms of terminology, and are we being led by the gambling industry, so to speak, or should we almost just reflect and take stock and use terminology and language that's more reflective from the people or the client perspective as opposed to the gambling industry? A couple of more final points then. Central collation of statistics. That's an interesting one because if we had a central reserve for statistics, particularly around problem gambling, I think that would be important. I mean, I was struck by the statistic in the paper around 2.3% of problem gambling in NI, 4 times higher than the rest of GB, and I think that was on the back of some research. So if we had some real-time collation of stats around all of this, it would give us a better idea of the ongoing nature of the problem. And also, depending on the type of those stats, it would give us an idea of where the problem lies, particular areas or types of gambling. So I think the issue of collation of stats is one that warrants consideration. I know that this legislation, isn't touching on the online gambling aspect, but perhaps we need to think about that. And can we be innovative and creative around that particular issue? There definitely will be particular work on that moving forward. I have no doubt about that. But I wonder, can we be creative and innovative about getting something in about that? And an example might be that in the code of practice, we could be asking the industry to make preparations for maybe greater legislation and regulation in terms of the online aspect. So to me then, that's almost sending a signal. It's a shot across the bows that more is coming, but actually it maybe then starts to place a requirement that actually they be thinking about it and doing more about it. And my final point is around its new Article 180A in brackets 2, and it starts off there, protecting persons under the age of 18 and other vulnerable persons. As the committee may know, that we're taking a great interest in the issue of safeguarding, and we're trying to promote that, and we're trying to say that the Department for Communities in particular, where they're dealing with vulnerable benefit claimants, and particularly struck by the Philippa Day case that was in the headlines there a number of weeks ago. And to our view, we're trying to say let's take that final step or whatever, and let's commit to a safeguarding approach. And I think, and we're trying to sort of introduce that into all aspects of the work and where we're engaging with the department on various aspects. And I think we could usefully use the safeguarding approach within this particular legislation as well. So, for example, we would suggest that instead of protecting persons, we would use the word safeguarding. So, safeguarding persons. And to me, that brings a particular structure, a particular rigour, a particular meaning in terms of safeguarding that perhaps protecting doesn't do. Perhaps protecting gives enough elbow room, and enough vagueness in the grey area, whereas safeguarding is, there are defined definitions out there, structures, policies and procedures and so on. But I do think that warrants consideration. And in that particular piece as well, it talks about making assistance available. So perhaps we could maybe even look to define what does this term assistance, feel like? What does it look like? I was also on the Be Gamble Aware website or whatever, and there's when it goes to other sources of help within that particular website, there's Citizens Advice, which covers England and Wales, and the Citizens Advice Scotland and the Step Change. And there's no reference to the likes of organisations that provides help here in this part of the world. So in many ways, we're a little bit excluded. More importantly, the person needing help from this part of the world may feel that little bit excluded from accessing services and so on. So it's a little bit GB orientated. So in terms of the code of practice, being specific to this part of the world would be important, and specific to those organisations that are here to provide help and support. So that's me. Hopefully that's helpful. Over to you, Kelly, and the committee.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and point well made. Yeah, we need to be very careful with that to make sure that if we're using legislation or reference in other legislation or even in regulations, that it is Northern Ireland proofed. Kevin, I have a few questions and then I'll take it out to the floor. Okay, so you've said in your paper, and as we've heard from Charlotte today, you welcome the introduction of the industry levy, but certain organisations will have considerably higher profits than others, for example, bookmakers and bingo halls. You propose that the levy should be or could be a percentage of the profits on a tiered approach. Just outline what you mean by that and how you think it might work in practice. And do you think this should be a statutory levy on a tiered approach?
Charlotte, I'll maybe invite you in as well, but I suppose Kelly and committee, our general thinking is we don't want to be overly cumbersome and overly bureaucratic and overly financially punitive on sort of smaller, maybe say voluntary sector organisations and other organisations where actually the generation of this income provides some amount of money, but it's nowhere near on the scale of other players, if you like. So we wanted to, from a point of view of fairness, we wanted to try and just be fair and reflect that in some way. So that was the purpose and the intention. Charlotte, I don't know if you want to say anything more detailed on the issue of the levy.
Just that we can take that away and provide further information at a later date, by just a written submission.
Yeah, no problem. But it's just the issue of fairness. I think Kelly was where we were coming from there. That sort of a blanket, maybe 1% might seem very easy and all the rest of it, but it's maybe not fair from the point of view of scale.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to others, I'm just you've welcomed the introduction of a code of practice. Should this be mandatory or voluntary?
I suppose if we're going to go to, again, Charlotte, I'll call you in as well. From my perspective, I think if we're going to go to the bother of bringing in a code of practice, I would like to see it mandatory. I suppose a code of practice in of itself, is let's put it this way, may give organisations enough wriggle room in terms of what they're trying to do, so in terms of their interpretation of the code of practice. So I'd like to see at the very least that it's made mandatory, and then I suppose the field of battle will move to how they're implementing it. But what do you think on that, Charlotte, as well?
Well, my point would be, and hopefully Advice and I would agree with me, that a code of practice needs to have teeth. There's no point in having a vague suggestion which many organisations could ignore, for their own interests. So therefore, as long as it's fair, as long as it's protecting the vulnerable, then I believe it should be mandatory.
Okay, thank you very much. That's lovely and clear. I'm just looking here. In the bill, under the code of practice again, just going back to that again, under the code of practice, that 180A, where it goes down to it's number 10, before issuing or revising a code under this article, the department must consult, and then it goes on to A, which is organisations representing gambling industry, and then it's persons who appear to the department who have knowledge about the social problems relating to gambling. That has so many people who could actually contribute to that. Do we need to define this better or widen this out? Because I would be concerned the social problems does include financial implications. For instance, where does a family member go if they want to discuss the financial implications that they're maybe involved in helping to repay debt? Have you any thoughts on whether we should specify that or another way to widen that out to make sure that the department is inclusive as possible?
If from my point of view, I take the point, and the point is well made, Kelly, or whatever, that we're trying to get this as wide and as inclusive as possible. If you think about it, it can be quite stigmatizing as well. That when I was speaking to Emma, our debt service manager, she was saying that there could potentially be more than the cases that we were able to highlight in our evidence to the committee, just because people maybe just hold back on how the debt was generated and so on. And we did speak already about the impact on the wider family circle and friend circle and so on. So your point is well made. I mean, the department promoted very widely in social media and so on around, they're welcome to take views, and that would be one maybe potential solution. But the point is well made, and we can perhaps come back to the committee on that. Charlotte, any particular additional views on that? Yeah.
No, I agree with you.
Charlotte, can I just ask you just for clarification? I hope I picked this up right. Did you say at the start of yours that you'd gone back through the records for a year, wasn't it? And there was 11 people, and it was totalling £217,000 a day?
Yes.
My goodness. It just goes to show, for such a small number of people, the extravagant amount of debt that has been brought up. It was interesting, last night I went onto the National Lottery website, and I just wanted to have a look and see. And I noted that it was later on at night, and they had closed off access to to buy lottery, which was fine. But in its place, there was a game that you could pay X amount of pounds for, and it was instant win stuff. And it was all, just as you were talking about, it was all flashy advertising. It was enticing. We've done it with cigarette packets where we've blanded them. Just thinking about that advertising, do you think that there's something missing in this bill about limiting advertising to make it less? And Mark, sorry, do you want to come in on that issue?
I was just scrolling on a napkin there, Chair, along those lines, and it's a remark Kevin had made, and now you've reiterated that got me thinking on it, and it was that sort of play this game. You referred to the cigarette packaging, but also, I mean, we've seen in places with a degree of success, I have to say, the removal of unhealthy snacks and drinks from checkouts in shops. However, that's precisely where National Lottery scratch cards are, and they are all coloured. There'll be Christmas specials and what have you now. I was wondering, just, I don't expect you to have the full stats off the top of your head or on hand. In terms of the prevalence of problem gambling and people who are coming and your advisors are helping deal with their issues, would there be a way of breaking that down, that so many are hooked in online gambling, so many are going into the bookie shops? I mean, you can avoid websites, you can avoid going into bookies, you can't really avoid going into ordinary convenience stores or supermarkets, and you're getting these scratch cards up the face. So I do think, Chair, it might be something might be worth considering around the placing of these products in shops.
Yeah, any guys, I know it's difficult when somebody comes to you with financial problems. As you say, it might be difficult to find out exactly where that debt has been created from unless they admit that there is a gambling issue there. I'm just wondering, is that point of sale type, taking that away, would that help, or what? Have you any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, we will go back and we'll get more information, Kelly, on those 11 cases that we highlight, or we'll try our best to get more information. We'll speak to the advisors who maybe can go back to the people and completely anonymised, try and get some more information and highlight that it's for the helpful purpose of trying to improve things for others as we move forward. I think that point is well made around accessibility and terminology as well, and perhaps the terminology one can be the first battle that we can win on this, because it's interesting around the flashy ads, as you say, or whatever, and the terminology and the play and the fun aspect of it and so on. Whereas I suppose from our point of view, and we admittedly we are one-sided about this, we sort of see the problem and so on, but it's around maybe ourselves and not as a Dyson and I, but as a whole society, even just sort of reclaiming the terminology and not just been driven by the terminology of the industry and so on. So, again, the one example that I picked out is, problem gambling. Do we need to be a little bit edgier about that? Or those suffering from gambling addiction? It does seem to me to be an edgier, but perhaps a more accurate, reflection and description of the, of where people can be and the dark place that they can be when they're under real pressure in terms of all of this. And and a point is well made about the bland packaging of cigarettes and so on, and why can't we sort of go a similar road with this here? And obviously there'll be objections to it and so on, but shall we expect similar to the smoking and so on? But I think it is the right thing to do.
Thank you very much, members. Anybody else indicating today? And just checking online, guys, to see if there's any of our Starleaf people. Just to say that Stephen Dunn has joined us. Oh no, Stephen's been here from the start, hasn't he?
Yes.
Kevin and Charlotte, I don't see anyone else indicating at this stage. There is a few things that you've offered to go away and think about. If you could come back to the committee on that, that would be really appreciated. Our time is flying on with this bill, so and Christmas is coming, but if you could come back with something that would be really helpful, hopefully in the new year. But at this stage, as I said before to NICVA, we may not be speaking to you between now and Christmas. Happy Christmas to both yourselves. Please pass on our thanks as a committee to all who work in Advice NI. I think as we're all constituency MLAs, we know how helpful that you guys are with our constituents and how much we actually get help from you with those constituency cases. So please pass on our best wishes. Tell everyone keep safe. We need them. And happy Christmas to all at Advice NI and to yourselves. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Kelly. And the one thing I would finally say that I sometimes make a habit of doing this, is to say, in summary to everything that has been said, and I know the committee have a lot of work to do, is what's our one thing? As a result of all of that in our submission, what's the one thing? The one thing we would say in terms of this piece of legislation, if we could get that word safeguarding in to replace protecting, I think that would be a job well done. And of course, thank you, Kelly. And obviously, yes, I wish the committee a restful break over Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. Members, at this point, before we move on to agenda item 6, we are moving through business quite well today. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:10 if I'm reading the clock correctly. Yeah, thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
Thank you very much, members. We're back in open session now. Members, just to go back on a piece of work that we haven't signed off yet, which is agenda item 2, it's the draft minutes. Members, the draft minutes from the meeting on the 7th of December 2021 are at page 5. Could I ask our members to are content to agree the minutes of the 7th of December 2021?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. I'll get those signed. Good, glad that's done, just so I don't forget that. Members, we're moving on now to agenda item 6. This is the Institute of Public Health and Public Health Agency joint briefing on the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill. The briefing paper is for you at page 272 of your pack, and we're welcoming Maurice Main, Helen McAvoy and Dr. Joanna Purdy. If we could just bring them into the spotlight, please. Oh, they're not here. Sorry, members, we'll just check to see if we are moving on quite quickly today, so we'll just check to see if we can get hold of the Institute and the Public Health Agency. Just before we move on, for the record, just to make sure, I have on Starleaf at the minute Stephen Dunn, Andy Allen, Anya Murphy, just to make sure that we have all of Starleaf folk registered as attending. Because this is our last briefing today, members, I'd be minded to hold fire to see if we can get a hold of the two organisations. Close the meeting again. We'll just close the meeting just for a few seconds, just to see if we can follow up.
Is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
Thank you very much, members. We're back into public session. We are now moving on to agenda item 6, and we are joined by the Institute of Public Health Ireland, who's joining us today. I'm assuming that's, yeah. So we have Joanna Purdy, Helen McAvoy and Maurice Main have joined us. Thank you very much for coming along and meeting with us today, folks, with our considerations in committee about the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill. Can I hand over to yourselves? I believe Maurice, and then we'll hear from Helen and Joanna.
Thank you very much. Apologies, I'm getting a little echo in that. Apologies, Chair. I was getting an echo on that feedback. I do apologise. Just for clarification, my name is Maurice Meehan. I represent the Public Health Agency, and we're jointly providing evidence to the committee alongside the Institute of Public Health in Ireland. I'm delighted to do so, given the Institute of Public Health in Ireland's very substantial reputation in public health policy and evidence and research, and would propose that Helen, in the first instance, would make a evidence submission on behalf of the Institute, and I'm going to make a complementary input on behalf of the Public Health Agency, if that's okay with you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Helen, then we'll leave it over to yourself then.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to for the Institute of Public Health to present on this really important bill. I'm afraid it's a bit like a tag team. I'm now going to pass on to my colleague Joanna Purdy, who's prepared our opening statement, and I will be available for the Q&A session after that. So I'll hand over to Dr. Joanna Purdy.
Thank you. Oh, you're on silent. You're muted, Joanna.
Oh, apologies about that. I was trying to avoid that feedback issue that Maurice was having. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for the invitation here today to present evidence to you on the draft gambling bill. The Institute of Public Health is an all-Ireland organisation. We're funded by the Departments of Health in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and our work primarily focuses on promoting health and well-being, improving health equity and reducing health inequalities across the life course. And we do this through research and evidence review and through policy analysis and evaluation. Just at the outset today, I would like to declare no conflicts of interest. We do not receive funding from the gambling industry, nor do we have any research, public relations, financial governance or employment relationships with the gambling industry. Just over the course of this opening statement, I would like to make some general comments on the bill and then just make some specific comments on some of the particular clauses that are of interest to us. First of all, we would just like to say that the Institute welcomes the progress that's being made in updating gambling regulation in Northern Ireland. However, we feel that it does not provide sufficient protection from harms, including protection for vulnerable groups such as children and young people, those with existing addiction issues, or those experiencing mental ill health. Just over the next couple of minutes, I would like to speak about gambling harms in the Northern Ireland context, the importance of legislation to prevent and minimise harms, and the need for a cross-departmental strategy. Firstly, gambling harms in the Northern Ireland context. Here today, we're all very aware of the harms that result from gambling and affect the health and well-being of individuals, families and communities. As we know, Northern Ireland has the highest rate of problem gambling in the UK at 2.3%, compared with 1.1% in Wales, 0.7% in Scotland and 0.5% in England. The risk of gambling harms is greater in areas where there's greater levels of poverty and poorer mental health. As Northern Ireland has the highest levels of deprivation and mental ill health in the UK, this makes us a particularly vulnerable nation in terms of gambling harms. Those living in the most deprived areas are 7 times more likely to experience gambling harms as compared with those in the least deprived areas, even though they actually gamble less. For every 1 person experiencing problem gambling, 6 others are adversely affected, and this equates to around 1 in 10 people living in the most deprived areas experiencing harm from either their own gambling or gambling of someone else. Just moving on then to speak about the legislation and the importance of legislation to prevent and minimise harms. Legislation is a fundamental tool for governments, primarily to prevent gambling disorder at a population level and perhaps to a lesser extent to address the associated harms. In its present form, we do not feel that the current bill protects public health, and we're concerned that it may in fact exacerbate gambling-related harms by increasing accessibility and availability. Evidence shows that increased access is related to gambling harms, and thus increases in supply may indeed exacerbate harms. My last general point relates to a cross-departmental strategy. Gambling can and will be harmful to some individuals, but it's important to note that these harms are greater than had previously been acknowledged. It's essential that the draft bill tackles gambling activity through a public health lens, and by this we mean taking collective action through a health and all policies approach and the development of a cross-departmental strategy to address this issue. Prevention should be at the core of any legislation and strategy, and we believe that this is a unique opportunity to do that and to prevent young people and vulnerable individuals from becoming addicted to gambling. Just over the next couple of minutes, as the latter part of my opening statement, I would just like to comment on 3 clauses in the bill. Firstly, codes of practice. We strongly believe that mandatory codes of practice are required, which are legally enforceable, that protect public health and focus on reducing gambling-related health inequalities. From a public health perspective, legislation gives stronger protection for individuals, families and communities. There are certain measures that we feel would be better placed as clauses within the bill, for example, self-exclusion measures, advertising and marketing, product design, and verification measures such as affordability. Elevating these provisions from codes of practice to legislation means that where there is a breach, they then become a criminal offence. There's a risk that with less punitive measures such as fines, that these will not be a sufficient deterrent for the well-resourced gambling companies. And again, in the absence of a regulator, it will be extremely difficult to monitor and respond to any malpractice by the industry. The Minister for Communities has announced a key stakeholder consultation on codes of practice, which is welcomed. However, consultation processes of this nature can be disproportionately influenced by industry lobbyists who are well resourced and prefer weaker regulatory measures such as voluntary codes rather than statutory codes. And just the final clause that I would like to comment on is the opening of licensed offices on Sunday and Good Friday. We know that increasing access and availability to gambling leads to an increase in gambling activity and potential harms. For this reason, we do not support the granting of additional hours at this time when there is no clear strategy in place to address gambling prevalence disorder or meet the needs of those experiencing harms. We're concerned that by opening on a Sunday, this will further increase gambling activity, making it more accessible, and to this end we do not support the liberalisation of trading hours until such times as a strategy and a regulator is in place. I'd just like to comment briefly on the industry levy. We firmly believe there's a need for a statutory levy that's proportionate to the gambling activity and harms experienced in Northern Ireland. We would point the committee to the statutory levy that's currently in place in New Zealand as an example of good practice. Evidence from the UK has shown that the gambling industry seeks to influence research and policy agendas and engages in extensive lobbying. To this end, it's imperative that the government preserves its role and right as a decision maker on the regulatory environment, and that any new legislation is protected from any conflicts of interest from the outset. We would caution against including within this legislation any commitment to consult with the industry. In short, we recommend that this statement is removed from the legislation. Just one further point. In addition, the allocation of funds from any levy must be transparent, independent of any industry influence, and again proportionate to the health and societal harms caused by gambling. This concludes our comments on the clauses. There are just a couple of points I would very briefly make in relation to items we feel are missing from the current bill. And one of those relates to the establishment of an independent regulator. We would ask the question, how will the government secure its commitment to both oversee the changes in law and protect the welfare of citizens from gambling harms in the absence of a regulatory body? We strongly recommend the establishment of regulator as a priority to oversee and monitor the proposed measures within the bill. We do feel that the bill is narrow in scope and does not address online gambling, and again we would welcome a commitment to bring forward legislation on online gambling within 6 months of the publication of this bill. My final point just relates to data and evidence. We feel like the lack of data and evidence really perpetuates a situation where we do not understand or we do not fully know the extent of harms or indeed the cost to the Exchequer and the state in Northern Ireland. And we would encourage the committee to consider including a requirement within the bill that requires data collection through government departments and NICVA. And just in conclusion, we believe this legislation must be established with a public health focus and governed by a strong regulatory framework to prevent gambling-related harms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maurice, do you want to go on ahead now, or...?
Yes, I think because there are a number of points I'm going to raise from a public health agency's perspective that are going to be complementary. So it might be that rather than risk the questions being duplicated, if I give my statement now, then I think we will be very interested in responding to questions from members, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Again, on behalf of the Public Health Agency, we are pleased to provide our oral submission today in response to the committee's call for evidence on the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill. The Public Health Agency was established in 2009 as part of the reforms to health and social care in Northern Ireland. The PHA is a major regional organisation for health protection and health and social wellbeing improvement. Our role also commits us to addressing the causes and associated inequalities of preventable ill health and lack of well-being. Public Health Agency welcomes the introduction of the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill. The bill provides an opportunity to consider the regulation of gambling within the context of emerging research highlighting concerns about gambling-related harm at a population level. This includes the recently published Hodgkins and Stevens meta-analysis of problem gambling risk factors in the general population 2021, and I've included the link to that particular study, the impact of COVID-19 on gambling and gambling disorder, emerging data, documentation and reference. This study reviewed 17 published studies internationally and highlights that during the pandemic lockdown period, the studies correlate increased problem severity gambling among younger age groups and mainly young males. The Department of Communities Gambling Prevalence Study 2017 highlights that Northern Ireland has the highest estimated rate of problem gambling at 2.3% compared to other regions in the United Kingdom. And essentially kind of 3 times higher than 4 times higher than in England. And one of the highest rates when compared internationally with countries which used similar surveys. Northern Ireland also has the highest prevalence of mental illness in the United Kingdom, which may make the population particularly vulnerable to problem gambling. According to the National Institute of Health and Care Evidence, NICE, which is the key resource of clinical evidence informing commissioning throughout the UK, in 2018, participation in gambling was reported by 57% of men and 51% of women. And estimates of the number of people in the UK who participate in harmful gambling vary very widely, from 300,000 to 1.4 million. And if you then put the Northern Ireland equivalent of those numbers, that would estimate to be between 9,000 and 42,000 of our population who participate in harmful gambling. Only a small proportion of people who participate in harmful gambling, approximately 3%, in England, Scotland, Wales, are treatment at any time. And in Northern Ireland, there are no existing health and social care treatment services. And therefore, this number will be much more limited and primarily limited to GamCare, the gambling industry funded young people's gambling support service, and the UK-wide Gamblers Helpline. Gambling disorder, problem gambling and pathological gambling are all terms used to describe gambling that causes harms, problems or distress for the individual and those around them. Harmful gambling is used as an umbrella term to describe any frequency of gambling that results in people experiencing harm. People who participate in harmful gambling may present with both physical and psychiatric comorbidities, in particular depression and suicidal ideation. Compulsive gambling, also called gambling disorder, is the uncontrollable urge to keep gambling despite the toll it takes on your life. Gambling means that you're willing to risk something you value in the hope of getting something of even greater value. Gambling can stimulate the brain's reward system, much like drugs or alcohol can, and leading to addiction. Consideration of the Betting, Gaming, Lotteries and Amusements Amendment Bill, the Committee of the Department of Communities should take account of the NICE guidelines, the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence guidance, and the fact that the Department of Health have asked the NICE to develop new clinical guidelines on harmful gambling, including the identification, diagnosis and management of problem gambling. These guidelines, once complete, will inform UK-wide addiction services commissioning. And the reference is the NICE guideline, Gambling Identification, Diagnosis and Management, Draft Scope for Consultation, December 2021. Currently in Northern Ireland, there is no coordinated system of early identification and intervention with problem gamblers. Primary or secondary healthcare services do not routinely identify or refer gamblers for treatment. So based on Joanna's reference earlier, the understanding of prevalence and treatment of harmful gambling is an emerging field for us in Northern Ireland, with ongoing research happening quite rapidly in this space. PHA notes the relative absence of Northern Ireland data on problem gambling and gambling-related harms. Further data and local research is critical and welcome to inform policy and commissioning of services. I also undertook a little bit of kind of a complementary analysis, which may be helpful for in consideration, and it's really related to the statistics from the Family Support Hubs, which is the referral process for families in need of support in Northern Ireland at the moment. And that shows the following. that in 2019 there were 7,590 referrals, and 5% of those referrals, 403 people, families, were referred for financial support. However, in 2020-21, coinciding with the lockdown and COVID, there were 8,405 referrals, and the referral for financial support has moved up by up to 27%. So that's a very significant increase in financial hardship. So, and that increase of 22% from the previous year for referral for families for financial support, mainly in relation to food, fuel poverty, food parcels and Christmas presents. There was no specific evidence of financial hardship in relation to gambling with these referrals. However, increased opening hours within the proposed draft bill could exacerbate financial pressures for families, which include those with problem gambling. So just moving to a conclusion on the specific clauses within the draft bill, Clause 2, opening of licensed offices on Sunday and Good Friday, PHA would highlight concerns that increased availability of gambling through additional opening hours may exacerbate existing harms. Weekend opening will increase the accessibility of gambling to a wider proportion of society, such as working age adults, children and young people. Clause 14, industry levy. In England, the Gambling Act 2005 contains a provision in section 123 for a levy on gambling operators to fund projects to reduce gambling harms. Successive governments have not made use of that provision. In the absence of a mandatory levy, the Gambling Commission requires operators through the licence conditions and code of practice to donate to fund research, education and treatment to reduce gambling harms. The 3-year national strategy to reduce gambling harms published by the Gambling Commission in April 2019 refers to the work of Gamble Aware in commissioning most specialist services for those affected by gambling harms. The PHA concurs with the Institute of Public Health in Ireland on the introduction of an industry levy and recommends that this levy is placed on a statutory footing in Northern Ireland. We agree that the statement relating to a requirement for government to engage with the gambling industry on this levy is removed from the legislation. A levy uncoupled from the gambling industry could be used to fund independent prevention and evidence-based prevention and treatment services to treat and support people who experience problem gambling in Northern Ireland independently from the gambling industry. Research into gambling harms in Northern Ireland should be a priority and should be the subject of investment from the levy. Finally, in Clause 15, Codes of Practice, the PHA also concurs with the Institute of Public Health in proposing that Clause 15 to give the Department of Communities power to create codes of practice, that these codes should be mandatory and legally enforceable. These should prioritise public health, focus on reduced gambling-related health inequalities, and seek to protect children, young people and vulnerable individuals. From a public health perspective, legislation provides stronger protection to the individual, family and community. Thank you very much for listening to our submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Again, another very worthwhile submission to us, and it certainly gives us as a committee a lot to think about. I'm going to ask a few questions first. Whoever can answer, please do, and then I'll move on to the other members of the committee. I just want to start off with I know that you have concerns about the Good Friday and the Sunday openings. You say a consequence of the bill might be that it increases the accessibility of gambling by extending opening hours and therefore increases the prevalence of gambling-related harm. You have also raised about online gambling, but is online gambling not taking over from the traditional bookmaker shop, and therefore extended opening hours will be negligible compared to the effects of gambling that's created by online gambling?
Do you want to respond to that one?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to respond to that? Sorry.
Joanna, I think maybe best placed to, based on the references to research that she's accessed.
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that question. Our concern around the increased hours is that, yes, we recognise that online gambling is increasing. There was an increase between 2010 and 2016 in the last two gambling prevalence surveys, and it would be really useful for that survey to be repeated so we know what the current state of online gambling is. But what we also know from that survey is that a significant proportion of people also participate in land-based gambling. So therefore, by increasing the access and increasing the opening hours, we are indeed potentially increasing those opportunities to exacerbate harms. As well as that, this is based on a theory called total consumption theory, where where increased accessibility leads to an increase in harms. And it's by the same token, it is proposed by those researchers that with appropriate policy and legislative measures, that in fact we can reverse that effect by reducing harms and reducing opening hours and reducing harms in the same way that we've seen that happening in relation to alcohol licensing. As well as that, we're also concerned by the fact that the Sunday opening of potential betting offices will coincide with many professional sports that take place on a Sunday as well, and people often go to pubs and bars to watch sport on a Sunday, and there's good evidence that alcohol outlets and betting outlets are often co-located, particularly in more deprived communities. They're within close proximity to one another. And there's also strong evidence from the recent Public Health England report or evidence review that there's a strong and clear and consistent association between increased alcohol consumption and increased gambling as well. So this is almost like a cumulative type of effect whereby we're increasing the access to gambling, and we're also at a time when alcohol licensing hours have also been extended in Northern Ireland.
Okay, just our colleague on the committee, Mark Durgan, has had to go to the chamber to deal with a statement that's happening this morning. Before he left, he asked me to ask a question about this. From the public health lens, we were speaking earlier to one of the other witnesses about the prevalence of opportunity for gambling, for instance, when scratch cards are available at point of sale, areas. What's your thoughts on that?
I have no particular comment to make on scratch cards unless Helen or Maurice would like to make a comment on them.
I wouldn't see them as a major concern. I think the challenge is that we know that people who are having difficulty with gambling are being effectively bombarded with a number of opportunities online, through their phone, through sport, through television advertising, radio advertising, and then also through the density of betting shops in their own local area. So it's the cumulative effect of all of those things. It's very difficult to single out any particular measure and say that that's more problematic than others. I think where we are seeing obviously, I don't need to tell you that the pattern has been this massive growth in online gambling, but I don't think that we've seen a huge fall off in land-based gambling at the same time. So although online gambling is the growth area, I'm not sure that we've seen any fall off in land-based gambling. So as I said, it's the cumulative effect of all of those things. And I think the regulation of online gambling is a major area for development from a public health perspective, particularly because of the potential increased accessibility of online forms of gambling to children and young people, where it may be quite clear if they walk into a betting shop that they look under 18 or could be identified, whereas I think it's far more difficult to get that age verification through a computer interface.
Yeah, from my perspective, it seems that overall there are multiple avenues and increasing opportunities for gambling online through scratch cards. and in terms of betting shops. So the proposal to not support the additional opening day, Sunday day would only close off one point of access. I think broadly the issue is that we're seeing an massively increasing focus on targeted advertising, particularly for young people. We are seeing multiple opportunities for gambling opportunities, and where the clinicians and British Medical Journal and other research coming into this space is highlighting that we have a significant proportion of those who are participating in gambling who are experiencing mental illness as a consequence of gambling behaviour, and also that those who are participating in harmful gambling also in many cases have existing mental health illnesses. So the issue is broadly about the huge responsibility that the industry and the Department of Communities and collectively Northern Ireland Assembly have in terms of thinking about the prevention and treatment implications of those who are adversely affected by gambling.
I'm going to bring in Paul Frew at this stage. Paul, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm interested in your commentary around a regulator or commissioner of gambling. Do you think that should be paid then, the commission or regulator should be paid out of the levy, the proposed levy, or do you think that should be a separate fee apart from the levy? And also then, what should that fee be set at? And should that be a one-off or yearly fee across the board? Or should that fee increase proportionately to the size and scale of the gambling organisation?
The Public Health Agency didn't make a specific point about the regulator, but the Institute, I think, thankfully have done some analysis and have a perspective on that, if Joanna would like to share that.
Yeah, and perhaps what I'll do is I'll maybe let Helen speak to the point about the regulator. If I could maybe just pick up on your point about the levy and the fee and so on. What I would do is actually point the committee to the example from New Zealand. We had Dr. Maria Bellringer from New Zealand speak to us recently about the implementation of the levy there, and essentially they have a quite a complex formula that has been created, and that formula has been derived in such a way that it actually pays for their prevention strategy, and it is considered as part of the prevention and treatment programme for gambling harms in New Zealand. As I say, it's complex and it is proportionate to the harms and the level of gambling activity in that particular country. So we'd be happy to follow up with some more detail on the New Zealand example, if that would be helpful to the committee. It's quite complicated to try and explain some of the detail just in the short time given, and I think it would actually be more useful to you as a written paper, but we would point you to their example where they have a prevention strategy in place, and essentially the statutory levy, and interestingly they have moved away from a voluntary to a statutory levy, which is a very important move, and that levy itself pays for the strategy. I just don't know off the top of my head if the levy also pays for the regulator in New Zealand. I would just need to check that for you, but we're certainly happy to follow up.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. I think we should look towards New Zealand just to see what that brings out, because if we are going to go down that route, even as a committee, I think it's important that we facilitate it belts and braces, and not just not leave something in hanging, and actually take responsibility for the whole measure if we are inclined to go down that road. Can I ask around the Sunday? I'm very interested with regards to the Sunday opening aspect and about the potential for harm, and I was very interested in your science, if you like, for want of a better word, around the harm of increasing excess and then diminishing access and the reduction in harm. So I would be interested just to see if you have anything specific, any reports. I think that would be useful for the committee also, if that can be shared. can I ask the question probably of both organisations? Are you content that Schedule 8A of the 85 order, the old order, sufficient enough and is future-proofed enough to not only protect gamblers from excessive gambling, but also protect staff? And it's not just in the point of view of religion. It strikes me that betting shops have very unsociable hours, working hours. They maybe open at 10 or 11 and then they work on to about 7 or 8 at night. So you can imagine how that would impact on family life. But Sunday might just be the only day that they have all the family in the house at the one time. So are you content with the old Schedule 8A of the 85 order and the protections that gives?
From our perspective, from Public Health Agency's perspective, I think the potential for the level of there's a high level of information that is missing around our full understanding of gambling harm in Northern Ireland, and I think that needs addressed as an urgent issue collectively. And Public Health would be more than happy to engage actively with the Department of Communities about the potential for further research in this space. But it's really in the absence of our current understanding, the high identified levels of problem gambling within our population, and the potential for further harm in the context of the level of unknown information about further widening of access to gambling. I think that our view would be that we should remain with the current legislation in relation to no Sunday openings.
Could I just follow up on what the sort of interlinked point here around the statutory levy? The formula that's set in New Zealand is based on the amount of money lost by gamblers in each of the gambling sectors. So player expenditure data, which we don't have for Northern Ireland, but I'm fairly confident that the industries are fully aware of the expenditure losses, and there would be nothing to stop the state requiring that data to be shared in order to set a level of the levy. Also, what's needed is estimates of the amount of harm, and Morris has emphasised there that we're not really collecting that data, certainly not for Northern Ireland. So we have to use proxy data until such time as data is collected. But there is an opportunity within this bill to mandate the collection of data, which will allow you to create a formula that is fair for all parties. And also, you know, on the levy in Northern Ireland, in New Zealand, estimated around 60 million New Zealand dollars, based on a population of around 5.1 million people. It's administered by the Ministry of Health and split between the General Health Fund and their gambling strategy. So I suppose that's an overview of that, but there is data there in relation to expenditure and in relation to losses that the gambling industry holds that would be helpful to the government in setting the level of a levy to support the developments in relation to regulation and in relation to the development of health and social care services for those that are in difficulty. On the particular point around people working in land-based gambling and betting places, I honestly don't know enough about their working conditions, their working hours, and how this may impact on them. And I'm just, I share your concerns that, you know, there is a risk of working very long hours, perhaps, and also being in an environment where there's a lot of ongoing gambling and so on. But I suppose our interest is really in the whole population and in those large subgroups of the population who we know need extra protection, in particular children and young people, in particular people with other addiction issues, including alcohol, and in particular those with existing mental ill health. They're the big subgroups of the population from a public health perspective that we're really interested in.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very interesting point you touch on there with regards to mandating of the collection of data. Strikes me as really sensible that in order to quantify the problem, you really need to have solid data. And if we don't have that data at hand, how can we ever help the individual or the problem if we can't measure it or ascertain the level of it? So even if it's not to produce a formula to help or assist a fee for a commissioner or a regulator, it strikes me as being a very sensible approach. So you've hit a note for me. So thank you very much. Just to go back to the commissioner piece again, you'll be aware that we have a gambling commissioner in GB.
Yes.
So another avenue I've looked at is, and this would be apart from the New Zealand model or formula that we could adopt here, and there might be opportunity and might be reasonable suggestions why you would want to go alone. But do you see that it could be easy enough to attach ourselves here in Northern Ireland to the work of the Gambling Commissioner in GB? Now, I suspect this will take Westminster legislation, but would that be conceivable that we could attach ourselves to GB in this regard? And if that meant paying the fees that are currently paid by GB associations and bookmakers, would that be proportionate to Northern Ireland?
I'm not a legislator, so I'm not sure about what's possible within the current terms of reference and legislation for the Gambling Commission and its operation in Great Britain. Is it possible? Yes, I think it's possible. Is it the right way to go? I think that's a difficult one to have a view on. I think it's possibly a useful thing to pursue, and with time to review whether a Northern Ireland specific gambling regulator is needed. But I'm not sure that obviously there would have to be an increase in capacity of the resources available to the Gambling Commission if they were also going to take on a regulatory role in relation to Northern Ireland, and there would need to be an awareness of the higher rates of problem gambling, the different gambling environment and the different local legislation. I know that recruitment has commenced for a gambling regulator in the Republic of Ireland as part of their gambling legislation, and perhaps there may be learning from the process that has been undertaken south of the border as well. I don't have an easy answer for that. I think there may be some legislative hoops to run through. That said, it could speed up some processes about bringing the regulatory environment in Northern Ireland up to a par with what is currently available in England and Wales.
Okay.
From my perspective, if part of the terms of reference for the UK Gambling Commissioner would include advocating on behalf of those who are adversely affected by gambling harms, that would be welcomed, because I think we are indicating that collectively we need to know much more about those who are negatively impacted and the hidden harm associated with children and young people from families within which there may be a kind of parent who may be subject to problem gambling. So I think that there's a lot to learn. We have a mental health champion, we have a children's commissioner. There may well be existing advocates for some representation in that space, but I think if there was an independent commissioner who was also specifically looking at Northern Ireland and current research prevalence and gambling harms, that would be helpful in the overall consideration of the application of regulations.
Okay, final question. Setting aside a formula, a New Zealand formula or any other specific formula that you would create here in this jurisdiction, I note that the fees in GB are set by the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Setting aside all the formula that might be used, who should set the fees here? Should it be the Department of Communities or the Department of Health? And does it really matter?
I note the representation made by the Faculty of Public Health, the Institute of Public Health in Ireland, and the Public Health Agency, and all of those submissions highlight just the overall kind of population implication of gambling harms, including in relation to the impacts of the responsibilities of education, the Department of Justice, and health at the very least, as well as kind of employment and training and employment. All government departments, I think, have a vested interest in this agenda. I think there would be some concern that we would have that if we medicalise or we regard the issue, this is primarily a health issue, that then it becomes a responsibility of just health. So I think Department of Communities are very well placed to convene the interdepartmental outworking of the cross-cutting effects of gambling and regulation. So I suppose I think we would be comfortable with the idea of Department of Communities leading this, because I think it's important not to medicalise this and make it solely a health issue.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and your answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before bringing in Ciara, just on that, sitting with communities, as we know, unfortunately at this moment in time, we still have departments that are working in silo and don't share data across departments. How could we be sure that having it within one department that this would actually work as with regards to gathering the data?
The Northern Ireland, the NICVA and NISRA, my understanding is that they do have a cross-cutting interdepartmental remit around the development of data sets across government departments. So I suppose it's really, who is NISRA just sitting under the Executive Office? I assume it is. But Department of Finance. Okay, well, maybe NISRA and Department of Finance are the best broker for the farming in of data across government departments. Just a thought.
Yeah, we do have that issue where even if we have the data, it's getting those various departments to bid on a collective way, for the monies for preventative measures and so on. But before I'll bring in Ciara Ferguson now, just with a question.
Just following on from Paul in relation to the levy, I'm quite interested from a public health perspective. Is there any research or evidence with regard to the use of levies with regard to other industries and prevention? I'm thinking of like the nighttime levy for maybe after 12 o'clock at night. I know it's kind of used elsewhere in relation to pubs, clubs, that type of thing. I'm just interested from a PHA perspective, has there been any kind of research with regards in the north or across GB in relation to the use of levies?
I'll need to put my hand up here and say that I would need to really go off and research that. We did make a submission to the Department of Communities in relation to the recent regulation changes in relation to opening hours for alcohol establishments. But if you could indulge me, I could further research that and get back to you.
That would be great. Thank you, Morris.
Yeah, I could give you a comment just in terms of the aligning the spend under a statutory levy with a clear strategy around gambling harm. I think that can be very useful to ensure that the spend from the levy is linked to a strategic approach to addressing harms in terms of prevention and in terms of meeting the needs of those people who are already running into difficulty. I'm not suggesting that the levy in other countries has been misspent. I'm only saying that to get the best value for money and to get that sort of outcomes-based accountability that you want from any monies that are coming into the public coffers, that linking it in with a clear strategy for what you want to achieve, what good looks like in 5 years, what sort of reduction in exposure to gambling harms you want to see for young people, for the general population, for young men in particular, what improvements in access to services you want to see. in terms of early presentation and in terms of getting people on the road to recovery. I think that's would be one of the key kind of considerations. The difficulty, I think, in the administration of levies in other jurisdictions has been that there has been some influence from commercial operators in terms of how the money is spent. There's very little evidence that running awareness campaigns, for example, or running a safer gambling week has any really meaningful impact on people who are already running into difficulty with gambling. So there's things you can spend your money on that are probably not going to give you a good return versus, for example, the development of services, the development of better research and better understanding the problem. I think there's things that could be done without even needing funding from a statutory levy. For example, inclusion of data on gambling in the health survey in Northern Ireland, within the young person's behaviour and attitude survey, to their surveys that are already in operation. So some of the issues with the levy in New Zealand was it doesn't take account of money lost through overseas online gambling, and it doesn't take account of harms from other forms of gambling, for example, that may not be recorded through data systems. So I think there's what can be done through a statutory levy, targeting the statutory levy towards a public health imperative. So that's my thought on that.
And maybe just one additional comment from me would be that on the trajectory of development of addiction services in England, Scotland and Wales, that seems to be on a very different trajectory to that in Northern Ireland. At the moment, there are no planned commissioned addiction services specifically related to gambling harms. Now, the new NICE guidelines, which I indicated, almost certainly will be making recommendations about pathways into treatment services. So if it is the case that in terms of future-proofing the implication of societal opening up of gambling and heavy advertising and promotion of gambling in the context of the vast majority of those gamblers who can gamble safely, but there being a significant proportion of the population for whom there are problem gambling implications, then I think that the investment for Northern Ireland Treatment Services is going to have to be considered. That's not within currently the health budget prioritisation within this financial year. So I think if it is that the treatment services and the cost of that could be a consideration in the context of the levy that you have the power to indicate as being mandated and raised locally here for Northern Ireland, that would be diverted towards prevention and treatment. Then there would be the opportunity for consideration of treatment services within that levy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other member indicating at this stage, folks. I'm just checking through my questions here to see if there's anything else that we need to cover off with yourselves. Could I ask, I know that you've mentioned it in your letter that you provided for the committee before today. Could you provide a link to the NICE guidelines that you've talked about?
Yes.
And if possible, a link to the gambling prevalence survey. I know you've said that one is perhaps out of date and needs to be carried forward again, but it would be interesting for ourselves just to have access to that information.
No problem.
And I know that Dr. Purdy, you had mentioned about the New Zealand and the potential for bringing together information on the formulation of levy that they have. If we could get access to that, that would be very helpful. I have one last question for you. If there is a regulator brought forward, do you believe then that the regulator should set robust penalties? Is that just fines, given the amount of money that can be made in this sector, or would you see a robust penalty being something more than that?
I might respond to that one. I think it's important to recognise that some activities of problem operators would warrant a criminal offence. For example, we have seen the issue of gambling now being recognised in inquests in relation to suicide. So these are about as serious as you can get in terms of outcomes for individuals and their families. And I think the seriousness on the offences, where people who are self-excluded have been repeatedly contacted, for example, or where young people have been facilitated to engage in problematic gambling. I think the seriousness of the outcomes from those should be reflected in the seriousness of the response from a sort of penalties or criminal justice perspective. I'm not a criminologist, and I'm not a legal expert in terms of the exact differences between the ways in which you can introduce a sort of punitive measures, but I suppose it would be remiss of me not to emphasise the seriousness of some of the outcomes from the problematic relationship between vulnerable people and the operation of the gambling industry.
Okay. If you have any evidence of any other jurisdictions where there's criminal, proceedings taken against someone. I'm particularly interested when you've mentioned there about the impact that it has to someone's life when they end up committing suicide. I'm imagining corporate manslaughter legislation may come into play, but if you have anywhere that you're aware of any criminal proceedings taken against the gambling industry, we would certainly appreciate if you could forward those to us, just for consideration. Yeah. Ciara.
Yeah, I think while the evidence is far from complete, it is concerning that a significant proportion of the income for the gambling industry will come from those with comorbidity, mental health conditions, and who are problem gamblers. And in that sense, I think it increases the significant responsibilities on the gambling industry to think about the implications of the vulnerable cohort for within their customer base and the responsibilities they have, particularly for them.
Okay, Ciara, I'll bring you in again.
Just one other thing. With regards to the Sunday opening, obviously, as the department's consultation, the majority of the general public were welcomed Sunday opening for the likes of your bingo halls and extensions and stuff. And Joanna, you mentioned the total consumption theory, which I understand from a public health perspective. It would be useful, I hate to give you any more homework or evidence, but Joanna, if you had any further information with regards to Sunday openings and how that might operate elsewhere, I would be really appreciative.
Okay, thank you. We'll certainly look into that for you.
Thank you.
At this stage, with no other members indicating, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank you for coming along today. You've certainly given us a lot to think about and a lot to consider as a committee when we move forward. The information that if you could forward on to us, those links, that would be very, very useful. At the very least, what we can do is to refer to those in our committee pack as a result, coming out of this legislation going forward for the Minister and for debate in the Chamber. But we'll certainly be considering some of the evidence that you've provided and the protections from harm that we need to consider. But for now, Maurice, Joanna and Helen, thank you very much. This has been extremely useful. I know we won't be speaking to you before Christmas. Happy Christmas, and please pass on our best wishes to all at the Institute and the PHA. It's been a hard year. It's been a hard couple of years. So please do pass on our best wishes. We don't need to add to your workload, but we do have a few asks from you if you could send those on to us. But for now, thank you very much and a happy Christmas.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Christmas, folks. Thank you very much.
Members, we've managed to get through all of those witness sessions this morning. I think that they were extremely useful, but we now move to agenda item 7, which is date, time and location of the next meeting. Just to say, all at 11:30 we're expecting the welfare supplementary payments first stage to be introduced by the Minister, and then followed up by the Social Security Terminal Illness Bill consideration stage. So I'll let you all get to the Chamber before that, but our date, time and location of the next meeting is this Thursday, the 16th of December at 9 o'clock in room 29. Thank you very much, folks. That's us for today.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.